Hey there everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today I'm going to walk you through the first drawer that I ever built, some of the tips that I learned, and the process that I went through to make it, so that if you guys are looking to make your own, you can see how easy it really is. The first step to making a drawer is to make the box, which will be the body of the drawer itself. These dimensions are going to be fully dependent upon your opening, but for me I put 1/8 of an inch on the bottom, 1/2 inch on the top, and then I left 1/2 inch on either side, which was exactly what my slides had called for. What you're seeing here is an excellent example of all the voids that you can get underneath a sheet of really nice plywood. Just make sure that you're putting it in a non-visible spot if you can. For these drawers, I decided to use a butt joint to secure all of the edges to each other. To do this, I set up my dado stack to match the 1/2 inch width of my stock so that it could fit in flush, and then I cut about halfway into it. Now the reason I didn't measure this too carefully is because I just wanted to make sure that I was consistent from one to the next, and that dimension was only affecting the depth of my drawer, which was not a tight dimension for me. Next, I modified my dado stack to 1/4 inch to fit the 1/4 inch sheet of plywood that was going to be the bottom of the drawer, and placed it about 1/2 inch off the bottom of each of the sides. Next up is just gluing everything together, and in this case a frame clamp or a strap clamp is going to be your friend because it allows you to hold everything together while you make sure that it's square before tacking everything together with a couple of brad nails to make sure that it stays put and you can keep working with it immediately. Next up is making the face for the drawer, and in this case I just decided to use a 2x6 laminated to a 2x4 and then cut that in half so that I could get 2 drawer faces out of it. When choosing the dimensions for my faceplate, I made sure that it was just 1/2 inch beyond the opening for my cabinet drawer all the way around. In trying to be efficient with making both of these drawer faces, I decided to just glue them on top of each other by using a piece of blue tape to separate them. That was a mistake, but we'll get back to that. Installing the drawer slides was far easier than I expected. My first step was to make sure that it was flush to the drawer and then fasten it to the drawer itself. Next, I went ahead and marked that 1/8 inch spacing that I wanted on the bottom of my drawer on both sides. After making these marks, I aligned the remaining portion of the slide with that mark, made sure it was level, and then in about 16 attempts was able to get it finally mounted. So remember that mistake I made when I was gluing up the faceplates? Yeah, well, it turns out I just ended up gluing both of the faceplates together. Now, the way that I ended up fixing this is just by prying them apart with a chisel. But this also brings up another good point about how do you decide which face is the back face for your faceplate. Well, here's a pretty easy way to tell. When you're picking chunks out of it, that's going to be the back. My recommendation is you either glue these up separately or put a lot more tape on there to make sure that they don't get glued together. Next, and not shown here, is running them across the table saw to get the dimensions correct, and then through the planer to clean up the faces a little bit more. This router step was used purely to add a small rounded edge over before sanding it to 220 and then going through and spraying it with lacquer. Next is going to be mounting the faceplate and the hardware, but before I mount the faceplate, I want to check to see which hardware I'm going to use because it's a little bit easier to align with the faceplate separate. Next, I aligned the faceplate with the front of my drawer, making sure that it looked the way that I wanted it to and that it was evenly balanced all the way around to cover my gaps and have the little bit of overshoot that I had planned early on. Next, I glued everything up, threw a couple of brad nails in it, and called it good. next step is going to be mounting the hardware. I first used a piece of blue tape on either side to mark the center of the drawer where I wanted things mounted. Then measuring from those points to the center of the drawer, I marked out the spacing between the two bolt holes that I needed to mount my hardware. This will vary depending on the piece of hardware that you had, but mine was spaced at 3 inches. I made sure that it was there before first drilling a pilot hole. This pilot hole was then used to put a Forstner bit in the back since my fastener was a little bit too short and I needed to countersink it, followed by the full-size through hole for the fasteners, removing the blue tape, and mounting the hardware. And that's how I did my first drawer. If you guys have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below. And if you like the kind of videos we're producing here at Northwest Craftsman, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up on the video and a subscription to the channel. Thank you tons. Happy woodworking.